Hello everyone, I'm Sally and welcome to our last Atta Webinar of 2019. Today I'm joined by Karl Parkinson, who is an established partnerships manager within the African Bush Camps team. With an abundance of trade knowledge, Karl has 20 years of experience in the safari and hotel industry, and he takes an authentic, caring approach to the culture of the African Bush Camps product. Today, Karl will be speaking to us about community and conservation within the African Bush Camps Foundation. We will have some time for questions at the end, so if anyone has any questions either during the webinar or at the end, there's a Q&A box which should be visible on your screen where you can type those in, and I will field those to Karl at the end for you. The recording of the webinar will also be sent out to everyone, so if you miss anything, you can refer back to it, and that will be emailed to you later this afternoon or tomorrow. So I'll now hand over to Karl.
Thank you, Sally, and good afternoon, everyone from Cape Town, a very sunny and hot Cape Town. I know not all of you will be in such warm climes. So I'm speaking to you here from our head office in Cape Town, and today I'm going to be talking to you about community and conservation, and specifically adding value and the meaning to our guest experiences. It's a very important part of the African Bush Camp story, and I think it really talks to the why. And not many people know much about it, and I've heard even some people say, well, it's a little cliched these days, but often things are cliched because people are talking about it. And I think as it's such an important time of the year, with Christmas being the time of giving, I thought it would be a good time to share what we do and the meaning behind all our activities. Of course, it all relates to our camps, our safari camps, which have grown over the years. We are now just opened our migration expeditions, which is located in the Naipan in Botswana. And I'm very excited to report that that camp is up and running. And I had the pleasure of taking some agents from the very recent Botswana Travel and Tour Exchange, where we spent 3 days in Naipan experiencing all the beauty of the area. And what is great is it offers a very much an authentic experience, which really talks to the roots of African bush camps. And it's something that started us as a business, but also talks to why we started as a business. And the Migration Expeditions is our latest camp on the back of Lanyenti Expeditions, which opened in May, and is actually the sister property of Migration. Incidentally, the Migration Expeditions follows the migration of Botswana through the Chobe and down into Naipan, with obviously the zebras that migrate there, and it's the second longest migration known in Africa. And then not forgetting our camp that we opened earlier in the year, Nyamatusi camp, located in Mana Pools. But I digress. Yes, we're about the authentic, and here you see Zambezi Expeditions, which is really harks back to what we do extremely well. It's about the authentic experiences. It's about getting as close to nature as possible. It's about spending time with our guides in the field. We're also about the romance. Let's not forget our flagship property in Zambia, Thorntree River Lodge, where we have the wonderful property based right on the river, overlooking the Zambezi River, and really does represent a different side of our experience. Because at the end of the day, we're all selling different experiences. Essentially safari, but people are going there for special occasions. People are going there for honeymoons. It's families wanting to share. It's people looking for something a little more wild. And here is a picture of our Lanyenti Expeditions, which opened in May. It's about connecting one with nature. And I think it's something that I referred to in my last presentation to Atta. Hopefully some of you had the pleasure of listening to that. But it really doesn't talk to the why. And I think that's the reason why I'm here to speaking to you today, is looking at the why. How did we get set up? What is it about us? Well, it was an idea. It was an idea back in the day that Bex had. Bex, who started the company in 2006, felt very strongly, and it was a thinking that he had, which was based on his own personal experience. And we've got this caricature drawing here, which I think kind of sums up where Bex was coming from. Because as a young boy, he was often aware that these safari vehicles that would often drive past full of tourists, and there was a total disconnection of him living on the periphery of the national parks and these tourists driving around. And I think the idea was that how can we get the two to work hand in hand? And this was basically an idea that Bex had after leading some safaris. He did some mobile tented safaris with his own business, but it wasn't giving back much to the community. There wasn't much contribution going on. So in the setup of African Bush Camps in 2006, we also established the African Bush Camps Foundation. And the whole idea was about rewriting the story. It was about the collaboration between community and conservation and tourism. And I think it's a really relevant story in Zimbabwe. I allude to Zimbabwe because Zimbabwe has had a rougher recent history with the political leadership that went awry, most notably in the early 2000s. And a lot of communities weren't supported by the tourism. And when we set up Somalisa Camp in 2006 in Wangi National Park, there was very little tourism going on. So it was absolutely essential then in the setup of African bush camps that was something giving back to the community. And hence we born the idea of the foundation, which was basically about setting up a scheme to fund various projects that would support communities and conservation in areas that we have. So it's about rewriting the story. And here we have a young Bex. He'd probably shoot me if he saw this photo. Before he actually started African bush camps. But it was through his learnings as a guide and seeing firsthand on the ground that gave seed to this idea. This idea is really culminated in something special. African bush camps opened its most recent camp, Migration Expeditions, this year. But we also opened Nyamatusi camp in the Mana Pools National Park. And here we have Bex, where he's personally signed one of the pieces of wood that's on the floor at Nyamatusi to mark the occasion. But I think it marks a journey that is quite special because I think often, there can be a disconnect between the communities and the actual safari experience. And what we've tried to do with the foundation is bridge that gap through community empowerment, through basically education, and through conservation. And if we take our footprint in Zimbabwe and Botswana, as you can see from this map, we've basically running over 70 projects in and around the country. And all these projects are tied into areas where we have our camps. So there's a direct relationship between the camps and the tourism and the tourists that come through our properties and supporting the projects in the area. The funding of these projects, the administration is just funded by the bed night levies that we take as part of the accommodation cost. And I think it's a really important point to mention that we only have enough money to administer the foundation with those funds. The rest is all dependent on raising funds through private fundraising events and people who visit the camp and get more interested in what we do as a business. But the range of projects are in the Chobe Enclave, Wangi National Park, where we have most of our activities, right up to Mana Pools National Park, where we support a lot of conservation efforts. These conservation efforts can range from supporting anti-poaching units, which we do at Boomy Hills, and I'll tell you more about that later, through to supporting communities in Manga near Livingston, and building clinics there for the locals, as well as into the Chobe Enclave and supporting projects around there, especially in the Kachikau, Karimba, and Mbele areas. So it's a whole story, and it really forms the reason of why we do what we do. Ultimately, it's about development. We're not into aid. We're not into just reliant on aid. We're committed to a sustainable plan, a sustainable development plan through creating opportunities that will empower these rural communities in these areas that are on the periphery of the national parks in Zimbabwe, Botswana, and Zambia. And these communities are underpinned by the empowerment projects that we use, conservation, and education. And it's these three pillars that really underpin all the work that we do with the African Bush Camps Foundation, which incidentally is registered as an NGO. So all the projects that we're involved in is run by ourselves. We have a whole team based in Victoria Falls, which administer the projects from there and actually go on site and make sure that they are running in a good way. We also, of course, invite people who come to our camps to visit these projects. And here we have an example of an American group who came through to see one of our projects. This one was the Tendonani Sewing Project, where people were invited to come along and see the local community in work. And it's through these projects that we've enabled people to make a living. Tendonani, by the way, means love each other. And it's something that the women of the village actually make a lot of garments, and they in fact make some of the gowns that we have in our camps, amongst other things. And they sew these beautiful robes, and clearly each of them have been made with love and care. And it's this time and effort that we put in that enables them to make a living in the communities that they're in. Some of our achievements to date in this area of community empowerment has been the Zimbabwe and Botswana communities. We've measured it over 2019 as 225 dependent family members have been supported through the projects that we've done. And that includes the Tendonani sewing project and the Vukeni bead making project. But it's this community empowerment that's one of the pillars that makes African Bush Camps Foundation solid. Because by providing the support to the members, they can generate the income in these areas. It's also about the holistic land management workshops, about how they can build their camps, their houses more in a more environmental manner, in a cheaper way as well. And it's finding solutions to heat water through solar. And this is a very good example in Mambaje for environmentally friendly development. We also do various events, and one of them is the running events that we do in Bulawayo, where people can raise money for the local community, and it also promotes a healthy and fun lifestyle. So the range of the activities we do reaches right through the countries we operate in, but mostly in Zimbabwe, because it's Zimbabwe we found that has needed more support over the years. There's less governmental support for the communities, and this is something that obviously resonates very strongly with the locals. Here's an example of the sewing project that we've done at Tendonani. The money raised per month by this project per family is up to $2,000 per month. So it really goes a long way to sustaining families and ensuring that they can live and make a living from the projects that they can sell, from the various things that they do, which includes making various quilts for the beds, as well as stuff for the camps. But it's not just at the empowerment, it's not just the community empowerment that we look at, it's also about education. And this education reaches right through from building teachers' accommodation, which we've done both in Botswana and Zimbabwe. It's also about building schools that we've done, the Mango Primary School, which we've made contributions to, and supporting them with raising funds for books and things is very important. And it's also about the sponsorship of the children throughout the year. The scholarship programs we raise has been at over $45,000 a year. But I think what is really good is that we've educated students right through to tertiary education, right through to university education, and we're seeing those people come right through. And the other thing is that we've also increased the pass rate. And this is very relevant in Mambajane, which has basically enabled them to start passing their exams and going on to higher education. Previously, these children didn't have access to that, and I think that's the important thing. They either didn't have the facilities for schools, or they didn't have the teachers qualified to actually teach them on the school programs. But the Mangwara Primary School, which is next to Mola Village, is our first project, and it was helped. The development that we did there was not raising enough money to, well, they didn't have enough classrooms, so we're going to be building more classrooms from them, and obviously buying furniture and textbooks. So it's not just about the education of the kids, it's also about providing them the facilities. We've also built accommodation for the teachers, because we found, for example, in the Kwai community, there's a school that's been built, but there's no accommodation for the teachers. So it's how we can engage with them more to benefit not just the students, but also the teachers too. So we take a holistic approach in everything we do. And obviously you get kids that are better educated, can go on to development programs and go on to higher learning. And we even take people from scholarships at university and take them into our camps as well, as trainees. Conservation, I think, underpins everything that is done in Zimbabwe and Botswana, and we're not alone in doing that. And there's many different projects that's done. I think the work that we've done here is really important, because there's obviously the issue of human-wildlife conflict, and we've done a lot of work around how to mitigate with that in terms of, for example, our cattle boma project, where it's through our Lion Guardian programs that we've helped basically stop the encroachment of the lions taking out a lot of the cattle, and we've provided these mobile bomas where the cattle are kept at night, and we have a warning system through a vuvuzela that informs the local community that there's lions in camp, and that can ensure that the actual cattle are looked after. Because if we didn't protect the cattle, what basically happens is then the farmers who obviously have cattle taken out would then in turn go and hunt the lions. So it's about finding solutions on the ground to mitigate the issue of the conflict of wildlife on the local communities. And I think the Cattle Boma project is probably one of our best examples. It's on the periphery of the Wangi National Park, and it's a real success story around the work that we've done. Of course, we also do education around that with the conservation clubs in terms of promoting schools both in Zimbabwe and Zambia. And we try and make them as engaging as possible by inviting the kids out onto projects and learn more about the work that we do in the field. But I think the ultimate is also providing food. And I think it's only too well known that the drought that's hit that region, has hit northern Botswana and parts of Zimbabwe. It's about how we can set up sustainable gardens for those communities by giving them additional funds to grow their own crops and vegetables, and also supporting our camps. And also with the Cattle Boma project is using, for example, the manure from the cattle to fertilize the gardens, and using those other projects to combine together to create for a better solution. So it's overarching throughout our different camps in terms of how we can be a part of this. And I think essentially with the conservation, community, and education, those three pillars provide the basic support for all our camps in Botswana, Zimbabwe, and Zambia. It doesn't just stop there. I think with the conservation efforts, it's around how we can be a better company. It's how we can actually educate our guides to be better storytellers when it comes to telling our story about looking after conservation and looking after wildlife, both in Zimbabwe and Botswana. And one of the things that we do at our camps is that we actually close them every year for a week, and we have our guides training. And that guides training is when we get all our guides together from all our different camps. They're all invited together, and all our guides then share information across each way, and we get specialist speakers in, and they're educated in terms of how they can be better informed around doing their jobs. It's something that we take on as a business. We take it on very seriously, but it's done every year, and it's for a whole week. And here you have an example of all our guides in training session with Nick Palanakis, who's one of our pro guides that we use for the training sessions. But we also bring in other people. And there's a lot of work that we do in the field, and those other people include specialists like Paul Hubbard, who will inform our guides in terms of the knowledge and increasing their knowledge base around the guiding that they do on and in the field. But ultimately, it's about the guest, and it's about getting the guest to connect with nature, and it's about how we do that as a business. And I think the involvement with the community and conservation enables us to introduce that to guests, because often we find when they come through the camps, they are not so well informed. And this is something that we're very aware of, and it's how we can educate people about conservation, about community, and the greater impact it has on tourism, especially in places like Zimbabwe. And by having people in the camps, they get a greater appreciation. So often we find when people go away after staying on safari with us, they go away better informed and want to get better informed around the conservation and community efforts that we're involved in. And I said in the beginning of this talk that, you know, often it references back to a cliche, but it's a cliche for a good reason, because it is so important in Africa that we support these projects, and the only sustainable way to do this is through tourism. Tourism being a relevant and regular revenue stream to actually provide the funding for a lot of these models that we use in our various projects. Some of those projects are not necessarily community related, and there's one project that we're involved in Bumi called the Bumi Hills Anti-Poaching Unit. It's quite an amazing non-profit organization that we support, and it's on the shore of Lake Kariba. And basically, it's dedicated for this conservation of wildlife through active anti-poaching units. And also, it's the active empowerment of the community through conservation-based efforts to stop hunters going in or people snaring the wildlife for their own consumption or for selling on. The Bumi Hills Anti-Poaching Unit has been a great success. 8 years ago, the population was well, over the 8 years, there's been 8,500 elephants that have been lost. But if we take the 2 years where the anti-poaching unit has been very active and useful, they've actually only lost 2 elephants. So we can make some really meaningful impacts by supporting these people on the ground in terms of the efforts they do. We're now setting up a similar anti-poaching unit in Marna Pools National Park to supplement the work that's already being done by other areas. So it goes beyond just the communities, it goes beyond just the education. It's about a complete holistic approach to working also with conservation and teaching, obviously, the locals how important it is to conserve wildlife for the future. Because that creates the moments, and it's those moments that make for a special safari. And I think that's essentially the why African bush camps does what they do on the ground in Zimbabwe and Botswana. And it's through our camps that we're able to support all these projects going forward. So I think, you know, we have this proverb that we use, and I think it's a very good proverb. If you want to go fast, you go it alone. If you want to go far, you go together. And I think this really sums up a lot of the work that we're doing in Zimbabwe and Botswana. I would now like to invite you to ask any questions if you want some further details. We do have our community on conservation safari on our website. We're actively promoting that. We're trying to engage with more customers, with more clients in terms of including them and bringing an awareness around the work that we're doing in country, so they can actually elect to be seeing these projects. We do obviously invite people to see our projects on the ground, whether they go to Bumi, Mana, or even Wangi. But quite often, people don't really realize the depth or the distance involved in going to see these projects. So we like to put it forward to everyone before they arrive, and then they can be better informed before they arrive in country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karl. It's really fantastic to hear about all those different initiatives that African bush camps are involved in. And as you said earlier, the why behind the camps. As Karl mentioned, if anyone has any questions, you can type them into the Q&A box, which is on your screen. I can see that we have one from Casper now, so I'll just field them to Karl as we move along. So the first one is from Casper, and he's asking if you could please tell everyone a little bit more about the #OneZimbabwe movement.
Oh, yes, thank you, Casper. Yes, I think what we've realized with Zimbabwe, and I've touched on it a little bit in some of the things I've said, there is a general negative sentiment attached to Zimbabwe. I think it's summed up by the recent Victoria Falls is running dry report that was reported in Australian media and spread like wildfire, and suddenly then you have people thinking that there's no water in Victoria Falls. Look, the media is all sensationalist these days, and we have seen it, the sharp end of that in Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe, I think, gets a bit of a rough deal when it comes to news. I think there is a bit of sensationalism involved. So we often find that things are thrown out of context. So as a business committed to Zimbabwe and the people and the country, we've started the #OneZimbabwe. This #OneZimbabwe is essentially a media campaign to drive positive sentiment and to try and control the narrative, at least through the good stories that are coming out of country that don't always get told by the media. This could be tourism related or not, but I think what it essentially does is to try and highlight the good stuff, that there's a lot more layers to Zimbabwe than the drought, which I think has also been widely reported, and it's about the good work that's going on the ground. So what I invite everyone to do is use hashtag #OneZimbabwe when talking about anything regarding Zimbabwe, and it doesn't necessarily have to be African bush camps. It's for the country, because ultimately we realize that if we don't have tourism going to Zimbabwe, a lot of the projects that we're involved in will not be able to be sustained. And I think it's so important for that country to get back on its feet. And as a tourism destination, it rates amongst the best in Africa, especially as far as the people go, as well as the experiences.
Thank you, Karl. The next question is quite a long one, so I'll just read it out for you. It's from Eust. What happens to the income from the foundation and its projects when there are no tourists paying the levy that feeds your fund? In the Mara Conservancies, camp operators, Fata, I think that means father, many years of using your system, have agreed to pay upfront regardless of beds being slept in. What will African bush camps do in cases like this?
Well, I think, thank you, Yusuf, for asking that question. The work that the African Bush Camps Foundation goes on regardless. So I think what we're saying is if there were no tourists coming into country, how would we sustain a lot of these projects? This is where we rely on a lot of fundraising efforts that we do, both in country and out of country. And it's something that we've realized that we really need to step up on, because we can't be solely dependent on the contributions alone from the bed night levies that we generate. We have to have a more sustainable model that we can do by aligning ourselves with fundraising events, as I say, with our partners and other like-minded businesses. It's also about working together with other NGOs and ensuring that we're getting the right, if you like, the right coverage on the projects that we're trying to make a success of. If I can just give you one example, there's been quite a development of camps in Hwange at the moment. There's been a lot of new camps coming online as Zimbabwe has had a honeymoon, if you like, since the passing away of Mugabe, and business is continuing to grow. We've seen a lot of new camps being built. But what was quite clear to us that these camps were being built, and the teams that were building them were foreigners, or there were people from outside of the country, or certainly not from Hwange. So we've identified this as an issue, as a skills issue in Zim, because there's an opportunity there to actually train and upskill all the locals, and to become involved with a lot of the building projects that are associated with the new camps, and of course on an ongoing basis for existing camps. So again, it's in areas that we can add value in terms of supporting the communities, and that's not necessarily related about conservation. It's about having a direct impact on those local communities. So to answer your question, Just, it's about how we can make them sustainable by getting them on their feet, by upskilling them or educating them so they can provide services in other ways. Because if we upskill the local community around Hwange to be carpenters, to be builders, then there are other projects they can be involved in outside of tourism. And I think this is also part of the key elements around how we're trying to develop and empower communities to sustain themselves on their own.
Thank you, Karl. We don't have any more open questions at the moment, so I can see one's popped up in the chat box. Let me just have a look at that. That is from Pierce. How has the drought affected food supply in rural communities, and are the African Bush Camps Foundation involved in supplementing short-term food supply? If so, what route are you taking?
The drought has had a massive impact in the regions that it's affected. We have been providing supplementary food at least to the game in those areas. We've been doing it in Mana pools, which has been publicized. We, of course, are in a situation where the communities that we support around the camps haven't been in dire straits where they've been starving. We do know that the UN recently published a report around the number of people close to starvation. The communities that we support around the camps have not been in such dire straits. We are trying to supplement those communities around our camps. So we haven't had the full impact. They've had the benefit of having the infrastructure around them to support those communities through the employment of the camps and the access to to food. But we are well aware that this is greater than just where we operate, and this extends into other areas where there are no tourists. And I think any of those projects we fully support in any way we can. But in terms of direct aid, we have only been able to impact those communities close to the camps, and of course the wildlife, because ultimately, if the wildlife isn't in the parks and isn't sustained, then there'll be no reason for tourists to come to Zim. And this is a very clear message to us that we need to protect the wildlife and conserve it for the future.
Thanks, Karl. The next question is from Joanne, who's asking who can she speak to or speak with to do some site visits with the communities.
Joanne, thank you for asking. We have our African Bush Camps Foundation manager, Obert. He heads up all the projects both in Botswana and Zimbabwe, and through his team, we're able to facilitate those site visits. You can certainly contact myself, and I will do an introduction, and we can set something up. That could be at any time, and especially if you're in country. And I'm sure he'd be delighted to have you shown around the projects that we're involved in.
Just to follow on from that, Joanne, and to everyone else listening, I will be including some contact details, probably Karl's, on the webinar, on the recording that's sent out to everyone afterwards. So you'll be able to contact African Bush Camps directly after this. We have one more question from Casper. It's another long one, so I'll read it out. So conservation is a plan for avoiding the unnecessary use of natural materials such as wood, water, or fuel. It's the protection of plants and animals, natural areas, and interesting and important structures and buildings, especially from the damaging effects of human activity. I think what you and other safari companies do that do more than just conservation. So he says, what I'm trying to say is, should you not be using a stronger, more up-to-date term for the word conservation?
Good question, Casper. Yeah, I think we're open. I mean, we're in an evolving situation. We don't have all the answers. We rely on you as trade to help, create this story. There's a much bigger community out there than our own, and it's how we can use platforms to better communicate the work that we're doing in country. And we're so dependent on trade for that too. As other names, I think you raise, it is an overused word. It's, as I said twice already in this presentation, that it's a cliche. I hate that it's becoming that, because it isn't. It's very real. I just think more people are becoming aware of it. And if there's a better way that we can come up with a term or a catchphrase, then I'm open to suggestions, as I think anyone else would be, because we're not doing this alone. There's a lot of other fantastic work going on, not just in the areas we operate, but outside the areas. And this is we're part of a much bigger problem here, and we're playing our small part in trying to at least take things in the right direction. And it's not lost on us, the impact, but I think because we're so close to it on the ground, it really does jump out at us a bit more, and it's how we can engage in more people and more communities to make that just a bit more visible around the work that we're all doing to try and educate people through the preservation of this earth.
Thanks very much, Karl. Casper says, well answered, thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone.
Okay, a question from Darcy. This isn't really a question, but I recommend that you guys include in your client data forms for the conservation/community safari that guest lists any specific skill set, in brackets, such as water treatment, engineer, contractor, etc., that would be useful to know before the trip runs to help connect them to specific projects where they might be excited to support it. Just a thought.
Darcy, that's a great thought. You're absolutely right. We need to elevate the specific projects that we're involved in, and certainly the specific projects that we're doing going forward. It's something we have identified as a team, because it's great just talking about the work that we've done, right? But I think it's a bit more than that. It's about the work that we want to do, and it's about how we can engage in the greater community around those projects, like you say, specific projects, to maybe get people more interested from that angle. So I take that on board, and I think we can action that quite well.
Thanks very much, Karl. That was definitely a webinar with a difference. If anyone has any further questions, feel free to drop Karl an email. I'll include his details on the recording email, which is sent out to you shortly this afternoon or tomorrow morning. Otherwise, I hope you all enjoyed the webinar, and we hope to see you again when we start up the webinars in 2020.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your time.